Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Student Borrower Protection Center's webinar, What Student Loan Borrowers Need to Know Right Now. We're going to give it just another minute for folks to filter in, but we will get started at 3 or 4 minutes past the top of the hour. All right, welcome everybody. We are 3 minutes and change past the top of the hour. So we have almost 100 people on, so we should probably get rolling. My name is Mike Pierce. I'm the Executive Director of the Student Borrower Protection Center. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you all know, we are a national nonprofit that is focused on ending the student debt crisis, and we are here to talk to you today with my fantastic colleagues that are the actual experts about what you need to know in this momentous moment for student loan borrowers. We're going to talk about the state of the world. We're going to talk about some specific tips on what you need to do to manage your own loans. And we're going to talk about some of the challenges for folks that are coming down the pike. But I wanted to start by just saying, this is a very fraught moment for people that have student loans. Nobody's had the student loan system has been largely in a state of a freeze for more than 3 years. That's not true for everybody. We know there are lots of folks out there that have private student loans or that have older student loans that are federal loans but made by Sallie Mae or big banks. Folks that have those loans, I'm a private student loan borrower. Folks that have those loans have been making payments this whole time. But for tens of millions of other people, most people that have student debt, the student loan system has been shut off. Going back to the earliest days of the pandemic, and that is about to change. So we're going to talk more about what that means, but I just wanted to thank you all for joining, and in particular to say this fight isn't over. The student loan system is likely to restart at the end of the summer. The president of the United States is going to say some words that sound a lot like you have to pay your student loan bills, but it's important to know that what's coming next doesn't mean that you don't have a debt-free future and that there aren't opportunities to get your debt canceled under existing law right now. It also doesn't mean that we aren't fighting every day to get the administration to keep its promise to cancel student debt for everybody. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how we build a world where people don't have debt anymore and where college is free. But we're also going to talk more concretely about what you need to know. And so we are happy that you're here today. Thank you for joining us. I'm happy to be in that fight with you. So I want to hand this off to my colleague, Amy, now, who can walk us through what we're going to do tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Amy Salata. I'm the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center. And I just want to give you a brief outline of what we're going to talk about tonight here on this slide. But just a couple of reminders at the top. We will be sharing out a recording of this event tomorrow, along with the PowerPoint of the slide deck, and then along with some resources too that might be helpful for you in managing your own student loans. And at the very top, I want to also shout out our amazing borrower resource, cancelmystudentdebt.org. Feel free to punch that into your browser right now and peruse it during this presentation so that you can, have a toolkit of what we're going to be talking about a bit. And there's FAQs there, a lot of really good resources. So thanks for being here, and I'm going to pass it along to Persis to get us started.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm glad to be able to share this information. My name is Persis Yu. I'm the Deputy Executive Director and Managing Counsel here at the Student Borrower Protection Center. I know that many of you have been hearing a lot of things about student debt in the news. There's been a lot of activity on the Hill, and I'm going to try to break down some of the most recent things that have been happening to kind of give you some context about what has been happening and what does this mean for you. So the two big things that you may have been hearing about in the news has been the talk about the student loans in the debt ceiling agreement and in the CRA resolution, which is the Congressional Review Act resolution. All right, do you want to move to the next slide, Amy? Thank you. So so I think some broad context, so the Congressional Review Act, this is Congress's way of telling the administration that it doesn't like the rules that it's put in place. And so it doesn't mean that it's illegal. It just means that Congress has a role to play to stop some types of administrative action through what's called a Congressional Review Act. And so following President Biden's announcement back in August of 2022 about the debt relief plan, where borrowers would get $10,000 or $20,000 of debt relief, which Amy will go into greater detail in just a minute. But he made the announcement about this debt relief plan. He also at the same time made an announcement extending the student loan payment pause. And so what happened is that Congress then has challenged that rule under the Congressional Review Act. And so what they said, what that would do is it would roll back and it would invalidate the plan that President Biden had made. This resolution unfortunately did pass the House and the Senate. And so I think it's important to understand what this thing does. It does both invalidate the debt relief plan that President Biden had announced back in August, but it also would roll back the student loan payment pause. And this is what we have been fighting against, is that this rollback of the student loan payment pause, because what it would do is those people have had their months paused. It would undo that pause. It would add the interest back and potentially strip people of the public service credits and forgiveness that they received during that time. Now, fortunately, so that's the bad news. It's pretty bad, pretty draconian. And it did pass both the House and the Senate. President Biden has promised to veto this resolution, so we don't anticipate that it will take effect. But it is something that folks need to be on the lookout, because it would, if it is successful, it is something that would be very devastating for student loan borrowers. The second thing that most folks have heard about is the debt ceiling, right? There was a big fight to lift the debt ceiling so that the federal government could pay its bills. And of course, there was a huge fight between the President Biden and Congress about how to actually do that. And what happened is that student loan borrowers were one of those bargaining chips. And so what wound up happening is that President Biden, as part of that deal, has put into statute the fact that the student loan payment system, the payment pause, will end on September 1st of this year, as Mike mentioned at the top of the hour. So that is something that we are looking forward, that we're not looking forward. It is something that we are anticipating. And that is why I know a lot of folks are here. And the other piece, of course, the other huge thing in the news right now, and the thing that we are all kind of waiting with great anticipation, is the fact that the Supreme Court is going to make a determination in two of the cases that were challenging President Biden's debt relief plan. And so we anticipate that decision, I mean, really it's any day now, but probably sometime later this month, we anticipate the Supreme Court will make a decision which will determine whether or not President Biden's debt relief plan can go forward. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to Amy. Thank you so much for paying attention. And she'll walk you through both that plan and lots of other really important information.
Thanks, Persis. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the ins and outs of the debt relief plan that President Biden announced in August, and what to expect in the next month as we await a decision. So the debt relief plan itself, these are the basic parameters of the plan. Essentially, it would provide up to $20,000 in debt relief for any federal student loan borrower who received a Pell Grant to pay for college, or at any point in their educational career, and up to $10,000 in debt relief for all other federal borrowers. There are some income caps to this program, and so you had to have made under $125,000 for an individual, or under $250,000 for a head of household or a married couple. And they were using the 2020 or 2021 tax year to figure this out, to decide on whether or not you're meeting those income thresholds. And there was an application process. So I want to state, that no one has received this debt relief yet, because it's been held up in the courts. But here were the parameters of the plan itself. Now, the application was open very briefly in the fall, and during that time, I want to say it was open for a few weeks. And during that time, 26 million people applied for this program, which really speaks to the popularity and the necessity of a plan for debt relief. And 16 million people are already processed and approved. They're just waiting for the Supreme Court decision to come down so that they can get their debt canceled. Now, as Persis mentioned, in mid-November, a federal judge in Texas and a panel of judges in Missouri blocked the debt relief program, and so they were no longer able to accept applications for it. Oral arguments were heard in February. We had a big rally outside of the Supreme Court with a lot of our partners to show them that we care about student debt relief and that student debt relief is legal. And we're expecting a decision any day now in the month of June. So we still believe that the administration's legal authority is clear, and we're confident that the administration will find a path to get this over the finish line. Some other things that you can do if you've already applied or if you haven't yet applied for the debt relief plan. So if you've already applied, you should have gotten a confirmation email, so make sure that you received that. The department is going to keep all applications on file as we await a decision. And unless you hear from Ed that you need to do something else, you're okay. You could make sure that your contact information is up to date. That's always a good practice. And then all applicants will be notified via email. So that's really important in thinking about people who might fall victim to scams. So the Department of Education will always contact you via email. And you can stay up to date with the Department of Education at ed.gov/subscriptions. Now, signing up for subscriptions is a great idea to do that even if you haven't applied already, so that you can find out when the application might be live again and apply right away. So that's a good idea if you haven't applied. And then you can also confirm your income eligibility and check to see if you ever received a Pell Grant during the course of your educational career. You can also confirm that you have qualifying loans. There's a list of those on the Department of Education's website. And then just make sure your contact information is up to date as well. So these are some things that you can do in the meantime as we await a decision and see what the next steps are. Now, in the meantime, as we await a court decision, there's all these other ways that you can get your debt canceled. So we're going to review some of them now so that people can be prepared and take the action items that they might need to take in order to participate in some of these things. So one of these things is called the IDR account adjustment. IDR stands for Income-Driven Repayment Account Adjustment. IDR plans, or income-driven repayment plans, are plans that are pegged to one's income and not necessarily to the entire loan balance. So they're often more affordable payments for borrowers in general. Every year you have to certify your income with the Department of Education under these plans, and then they'll calculate your monthly payment based on your income. So they're often more affordable plans for borrowers. And one thing that can be a bit distressing about these plans is that, since you're only making a minimum payment each month, that might not touch the principal of your loan and might only kind of tackle some of that interest that's accruing, is that you might log into your account every month after paying, once a month and find that your balance is ballooning. And so this can be really distressing for folks. And so they kind of accounted for this. And when they made the income-driven repayment plans, they made it so that after 20 or 25 years in repayment, depending on your situation, you can get the rest of your debt canceled after being in repayment that long. So this is really good news, right? You can get your debt canceled after 20 or 25 years in repayment under these IDR plans. However, last year, a Government Accountability Office report found that the Department of Education, that servicers weren't tracking people's time in repayment towards that 20 or 25 year threshold. Servicers were also found to be steering people into forbearance and deferment rather than offering income-driven repayment plans. And so under these IDR plans, the Government Accountability Office found that, under fewer than 200 people out of a potential universe of 4 million people have ever received cancellation under these plans. So this is a huge problem, right? This is evidence that, a government program isn't working the way that it should work. So to rectify this, the Department of Education announced this income-driven repayment account adjustment. And what this is it's basically a one-time audit of all federal accounts to see how close people are to that threshold of 20 or 25 years. They're going to count any time in repayment and the other options kind of in this bulleted list here. So you could get some periods of forbearance to count, some periods of deferment. Basically, they're going to be counting any time that you haven't been in default or any time that you haven't been in school deferment. And so, this is great news for folks who have been in repayment for a very long time, that they can get near or over the threshold of that 20 or 25 year mark. Another really great thing, which we'll get to in more detail in a moment, is that through this IDR account adjustment, Any time that you're getting as credit towards IDR cancellation also counts for public service loan forgiveness if you're working for a public service entity. So that's really great news for all those public service workers who are looking to gain that retroactive credit that they maybe weren't able to get in the past. So this is really good news. So let's talk a little bit about the steps that you need to take to participate in this. So one thing that's really important is knowing what type of loans you have, because it affects your eligibility for this program and for some other programs. So let's go over how to do that. So first, you want to log into studentaid.gov and look at your dashboard and see what type of loans you have. There you'll be able to see the details of your loans. And you can also download your aid data, which will give you a more granular list of your loan types and the payments that you've made towards your loans. Now, one thing that's really important is that federal loans, there are several different types of federal loans. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about direct loans and a little bit about FFEL loans, or Federal Family Education Loans. Federal Family Education Loan Program is what FFELP stands for. So direct loans are loans that are owned directly by the federal government. And if you log into your studentaid.gov account and it says direct next to it, that's how you know it's a direct loan. That's going to be important when we talk about public service loan forgiveness in a moment. But for right now, I want to draw your attention to federal family education loans here. So there are two types of federal family education loans. There are ones that are held directly by the Department of Education, and there are ones that are held by private lenders or servicers. The difference is important because if you have those loans that are not held by the Department of Education, you'll need to consolidate them in order to participate in the IDR account adjustment. So one way to tell that's really easy is by if you haven't been receiving the payment pause, if you have been required to make payments during the payment pause, that's how you can tell that they are commercially owned. If you have been receiving the payment pause, you haven't been required to make payments during the last 3 years. That's how you can tell that they're owned directly by the Department of Education. And so you can see here that the loans that are, there's the second block here says that they're serviced by Wells Fargo Bank. And then the last block here says Department of Ed Mohila. So this last block will tell you that they're owned directly by the Department of Education. And if they're owned by a private lender like Wells Fargo Bank, then you know that they're commercially owned. Okay, so some action items to review really quickly. So for the IDR account adjustment, most people will have their account adjusted automatically. But if you have those non-ed held FFEL loans, you'll need to consolidate before the deadline of December 31st, 2023 in order to participate in the IDR account adjustment and get that credit towards that 20 or 25 year mark, as well as that PSLF credit that we talked about too. And there's some more kind of parameters around the PSLF program, we'll get to in a minute. But these are the action items that you need to take in order to participate in the IDR account adjustment. And then one note on just a timeline. So again, I'm going to be mentioning this deadline of December 31st quite a few times today. But the department's going to begin adjusting the accounts of those that have been in repayment longest first. So for those that have been in repayment for 20 or 25 years, those accounts will be adjusted, sooner than the rest of the federal borrowers. And the same goes that if you are seeking PSLF and you have over 10 years of public service work, they'll be adjusting those accounts first. And then all other borrowers' accounts will be adjusted after those in 2024, because the deadline is December 31st, so they need to wait till the deadline happens and then they can start adjusting those accounts in 2024. So this is the deadline, or I'm sorry, not the deadline. This is the basic timeline for the IDR account adjustment to happen. All right, so now let's get to public service loan forgiveness. So you may have heard of public service loan forgiveness. You might be already familiar. The Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was created in 2007 by Congress as a way to make sure that public service workers, that were struggling with their student debt would have an option to getting their debt canceled. And then also making sure that future public service workers wouldn't be deterred from entering the public service because of their student loan balances. And really, it's quite simple. The promise is that after 10 years of affordable payments on your student loans while working in the public service, you can get the remainder of your debt canceled. There are typically 4 requirements for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. The first is that you need to have the right type of loan, which is a direct loan. Remember, that's one of the loans that I mentioned on the previous section. So this has been the main type of federal loan since 2010. So if you log into your studentaid.gov account and see that it says direct next to any of your loans, you know that they're direct loans and that they qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Now, if you have another type of loan like a Fell or Perkins loan, you're able to consolidate those loans into direct loans in order to become eligible for the program. So I just want to mention that off the top, that, if you don't currently have a direct loan, but you have, other federal loan types, you are able to consolidate those to make them eligible. The second requirement for the public service loan forgiveness program is being in the right type of repayment plan, which generally for the program is one of those income-driven repayment plans that I mentioned in the last section. There are 4 plans that qualify for, or that are within the income-driven repayment plans, and I'll just mention them very briefly right now so that you have a general idea. They're income-based repayment, or IBR, income contingent repayment, or ICR, pay, which is pay as you earn, or repay, which is revised pay as you earn. So those are the 4 plans that are generally the plans that qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Third, you need to be in the right type of employment, which is employment in the public service, which is defined as any level of government, that's federal, state, local, or tribal governments, any 501c3 nonprofit, or certain other nonprofits, depending on the type of work that you do. And the thing that most often kind of falls into that bucket is something like emergency services. If you're a first responder or working in emergency services, that's often, in that bucket of work. And you need to work full time, which is defined as 30 hours a week. And then finally, you need to make 120 payments on your loans while meeting each of the other requirements. So you need to make 120 payments, or 10 years worth of payments, while working in the public service full time, being enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan on a direct loan. So those are the general program requirements. And then another note on the 120 payments needed, those don't have to be consecutive payments. So, you could work in the public service for 5 years, accrue that time, and have 5 years, towards PSLF, towards the 10 years needed. And then you could take off a couple of years and work in the private sector, and then come back to the public sector, and pick up where you left off. So you wouldn't get that time that you spent in the private sector to count towards PSLF, but the time doesn't have to be consecutive time. Okay, so really good news on this front is that any months that we've been in the payment pause count towards those 120 payments. So you still need to be meeting each of the other requirements, but the most important and most relevant one is that you're working in the public service. So you need to be currently employed by a public service entity in order to be eligible for this. But essentially this payment pause means that you have about 3.5 years of credit that you didn't need to be making, payments on your loans during that time. So it's really good news for folks who are seeking PSLF during the payment pause. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how the PSLF program interacts with the IDR account adjustment. Essentially, this is a way, this moment in time while the IDR account adjustment is happening is a way for public service workers to get retroactive credit towards PSLF. And it doesn't matter, what type of loan you have or had, or, if you've been enrolled in income-driven repayment plans previously. It's a way to kind of get up to speed, make sure that you're on track, and get that retroactive credit so that it can be, applied to your account, and then you can continue accruing credits, or maybe you're already past the threshold of that 10-year mark. So what it looks like is that if you don't have a direct loan currently, you need to consolidate in order to participate, in order to get on track for PSLF. And then if you haven't previously filed something called a PSLF form, it's basically a certification form that your employer needs to sign, saying that you worked, for that agency or for that nonprofit for X amount of time. And then you send it into the Department of Education, or to MOHELA, the servicer that handles the public service loan forgiveness program, in order to kind of verify that you worked there during that time. So those are kind of the 2 action items, but you're able to get all that retroactive credit that you maybe weren't able to get previously. So one note that I want to make is on Parent Plus borrowers. there was something called the PSLF waiver that existed from October 2021 to October 2022, where public service workers were able to get retroactive credit towards PSLF because of a lot of administrative issues with the program previously. This was a huge relief to borrowers. It got a lot of borrowers back on track for PSLF or put them past the threshold of that 10 years that they needed. But one thing about this was that Parent Plus borrowers were excluded from the PSLF waiver. And so the good news on this front is thanks to a lot of really hardworking advocates, at the end of 2022, the Department of Education announced that Parent Plus borrowers would be eligible to get PSLF credit as part of the IDR account adjustment. So this is really huge for folks that have taken out loans for their children to go to college, to attend college, and to help with their the cost of their education. So we're really thrilled about this. But the action items for this are that you would need to fill out a PSLF form in it, just like other PSLF borrowers, in order to get on track for cancellation under PSLF. And then you could also consider consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan if you haven't already reached 10 years in public service. This is going to be a little different for everyone, because we've been on a payment pause for 3.5 years. It might be cheaper for you to be on the standard plan for some Parent Plus borrowers, or it might be cheaper, a more affordable payment to be on an income-driven repayment plan. But that's something that, you could consider if you're looking to participate in PSLF. So just like the IDR account adjustment, the deadline to apply or to consolidate your loans in order to be eligible for PSLF credit through the IDR account adjustment is December 31st, 2023. So this deadline is super important. Please mark it down. This is the deadline to consolidate if you want to participate in the PSLF program and get that retroactive credit through the IDR account adjustment. Now let's just do a quick review of the steps that you need to take if you are seeking PSLF through the IDR account adjustment. So just like the other IDR account adjustment set of slides, log into studentaid.gov and figure out what type of loans you have. If you don't have direct loans, you'll need to consolidate before December 31st of 2023 in order to get on track for PSLF through this account adjustment. If you have Parent Plus loans, you can consider consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan. And then submit all PSLF forms for any eligible public service work that you've had since October 1st of 2007 when the program began. Okay, so this is the note I wanted to make. So any the PSLF forms can be submitted at any time, but the deadline is really important for consolidation. So you need to consolidate before December 31st. And certainly we recommend that, if you're seeking PSLF, that you get your PSLF forms in once a year or every time that you change public service jobs. You don't have to do this. You could document everything after 10 years, but it's a great way to catch any mistakes that are made during the process and fix them in real time. And so, the deadline is to submit your PSLF forms is not December 31st. That's just for consolidation. But just want to mention it, that it's always a good idea and a good practice to get them in as soon as possible and every time you switch jobs and once a year. Okay, so next we'll be talking a little bit about Fresh Start, which is an initiative to help borrowers that are currently in default. So the Fresh Start program essentially has the potential to get 7 million borrowers currently in default, out of default. It restores their ability to participate in repayment options, including those income-driven repayment plans which are often more affordable for borrowers. It also immediately restores their eligibility to go back to school and get financial aid to go back to school. If you're in default, there are typically 2 ways out of default. There is consolidation, or there is a process called rehabilitation, which takes quite a bit of time. It's about a 10-month process. There's a lot of monitoring to make sure that a borrower is able to make their monthly payments. And so it's a pretty onerous and long process. And so Fresh Start is really a way for folks to get out of default more easily and more quickly. And so if someone rehabilitated during the payment pause, that option for rehabilitation is restored. And so that's really a lifeline to folks that have been in default. In addition, it helps, there's beneficial credit reporting features, and then it also protects people from involuntary collections as well. So there are a lot of benefits to Fresh Start. These are the eligible defaulted loans for Fresh Start. One note that I want to make is that you have to have defaulted on your loan prior to March 13th of 2020 when the payment pause began. And if a loan were to default after the payment pause ends, that wouldn't be eligible for Fresh Start. But these are the types of loans that are generally eligible for Fresh Start. These are the loans that are ineligible for Fresh Start. These defaulted loans, these are smaller pieces of the pie, but want to mention them, want to share them with you here in case it's useful for any folks that are on the call. Now, there, like many of these other programs, there are action items with the Fresh Start initiative. So borrowers have 1 year after the payment pause ends, which I'll get to in a moment, to do one of two things in order to participate in Fresh Start. So either they have to communicate to the default resolution group or their guarantee agency to request to be put on a repayment plan, or they could request financial aid at an eligible school. If you decide to go the latter route, the school will just need to get a signed statement from you that you agree to transfer your loans to a non-default servicer. But so these are the two options, and you have 1 year to do this. And if after the payment pause ends, and if you don't do this, then your loans will be put back into default using the original date of delinquency. So there are, really time-sensitive pieces to this, and it's a really great opportunity for folks. And so please help us in spreading the word, to get folks out of default through one of these two, mechanisms through Fresh Start. Okay, so finally, we're just going to review how to prepare for return to repayment. As Persis mentioned, the payment pause is scheduled to end on September 1st of this year. And so we just want to kind of get folks ready for what to expect with that. And then we'll go over some important takeaways, and then we'll get to your questions. Okay, so as Persis mentioned, the pause is set to end after August 30th. On September 1st, the pause will end. In order to prepare, you could update your contact information. A lot of folks moved during the pandemic, and so it's a great practice to update your contact information with your servicer and with studentaid.gov. You can also request a refund for any payments that were made voluntarily after March 13th of 2020. So this is a really good option for folks who are maybe seeking PSLF, who are hoping to get their debt canceled after 10 years in repayment. And so, requesting a refund for any voluntary payments made between March 13th and now March 13th of 2020 and now, is that you might have a little bit of extra money in your pocket. So you are able to call your servicer and ask for a refund. As I mentioned, income-driven repayment plans need to be recertified every year. And typically that involves, proving that you submitting paperwork to prove that your income is a certain amount. But right now, servicers are still accepting verbal certifications, and so you are able to call your servicer and state your income and get recertifications that way. But remember to continue to enroll and recertify an income-driven repayment if you are on an income-driven repayment plan now, or if you'd like to be on one post-payment pause. And then if you had automatic payments before the pandemic began or before the payment pause began, the Department of Education has stated that they aren't automatically going to be starting any auto-debited payments after the payment pause ends. So if that's something that you were doing before the payment pause, you'll need to re-enroll. But then it's also a good idea to just double check that once payments begin, that nothing is being auto-debited from your account. That shouldn't happen automatically post the payment pause. So it's something to keep in mind and look out for once payments begin again. Okay, so I know that was a ton of information on a late Tuesday evening. So let's just go over some important takeaways, and then we'll get to your questions. Okay, so remember that the Supreme Court decision is going to come out this June, we're expecting, likely. And so that will determine, what happens next with President Biden's debt relief plan, where, borrowers are eligible for that $10,000 or $20,000 in debt relief. Importantly, check what type of loans you have by logging into studentaid.gov, because it'll affect whether or not you need to consolidate in order to access some of these programs. So remember, if you have non-ed held FFEL loans, you'll need to consolidate before December 31st to participate in the IDR account adjustment. And if you don't have direct loans, but you're seeking PSLF, you'll need to consolidate before this December 31st deadline as well. If you're currently in default, remember that you can either request to be put on a repayment plan by calling your guarantee agency or the default resolution group, or you can request, aid from an eligible school if you're seeking to get out of default. And remember that you have 1 year after this September 1st date of this year, since the payment pause is ending then, in order to do one of those action items to get out of default. But a couple more things. Beware of scams. You can tell from this presentation that there's a lot of things changing right now. And so, just be mindful that people might be looking to take advantage of that. And remember that the Department of Education will always contact you via email, and just be, vigilant when thinking about your student loans, and make sure that you're, getting things from a verified source like the Department of Education's website or studentaid.gov. And then finally, file complaints if you experience any issues. You can file a complaint with the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson within the Department of Education. You could also file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And then some states have student loan ombudspersons at the state level, and you could also file a complaint or seek help from your state student loan ombudsperson. Complaints are really important in shaping policy for the future, and also getting items fixed more quickly. So the more people complain about a certain issue, the more an agency, will have, will want to fix it. And so please file complaints if you experience any issues. Okay, I know that was a lot of information, so I'm going to welcome my colleague Kat Welbeck to help us with the Q&A, and invite Persis and Mike back to help us answer some questions tonight.
Thanks so much, Mike, Persis, and Amy. That was incredible and a lot of information. And we also got a lot of questions tonight. So what I'm going to try my best to do is go through these pretty quickly and group them together. But thank you so much, everyone, for dropping your questions in the chat. If you have questions while we're going through Q&A, please feel free to continue to drop them in the Q&A. Also, one note, we got a couple of questions. This is being recorded. We'll send a recording to the same email address that you used to register for today's webinar. And then also, Mike mentioned this earlier during the presentation, but a lot of these resources can also be found at cancelmystudentdebt.org, and we'll drop that in the chat in just a second. But just to get started, Persis, you talked a little bit about the CRA, and so people were just, and Mike, I saw you answer some of these questions in the chat, but do you mind talking a little bit about what timing people should expect for the president to veto? Is that something that we expect them to do? We have some people concerned about, will this roll back the progress that they've made during the payment pause?
Sure, and I can give a little bit more context, and I'll take that a little bit out of order just to say what did it do, and then talk a little bit more about the procedures going forward. So the way the Congressional Review Act, because I saw that one of the questions said that there seems to be a debate out in the ether about whether or not the Congressional Review Act would roll back or would not roll back. It is the Congressional Review Act statute specifically says that if an action is undone by Congress, it would undo anything that took effect because of it. So in our legal analysis, that means that any effect of the payment pause from September 1st, 2022 through at least December would be undone. So those months would be undone. The interest would come back, and payments, payments that were credited towards PSLF would be rolled back. I think there's an outstanding question about what that would mean for the 8th payment pause, right? Because remember, it was extended again that December. So that was not the same rule, but we think it probably would, but it's unclear. So that's kind of what it would do in terms of the timing. The president has, as I understand, like roughly 10 days, and then there's ways that they count days to veto, but that's after it gets delivered to the president's desk. And so there is some timing. Congress can override a veto. We don't expect that to happen. We don't think they have the votes to have that happen. But that is a thing that exists in the world that people should pay attention to. So I think that covered all of the questions, but let me know if I missed anything.
Yes, that was great. Thank you so much, Persis. And then we also got a couple of questions about cancellation. And so someone was wondering, so they hadn't applied for cancellation before the courts blocked the application. What are some things that they should do, or what they should expect to do as we await a decision?
I'm happy to take that one since Persis did the last one. So right now it's a lot of wait and see. Amy had some great advice on what you can do to understand your options and potentially other ways to get your debt canceled. It's important to know that the program that promises to cancel either $10,000 or $20,000 worth of debt relief, that is on hold because of a court order. We're waiting on the Supreme Court to reach a decision. But as Amy mentioned, none of those other paths to debt cancellation are blocked right now. So getting in line for the IDR adjustment, particularly if you have an older student loan, getting your forms in if you're eligible for public service loan forgiveness, learning more about the opportunities to get your debt canceled if you went to a for-profit college or if you have a significant disability. There are lots of different avenues to get your debt canceled that will not be available to everybody, but they will be available to millions of people. And you can learn more about that at cancelmystudentdebt.org. Again, that's not how to get ready for the application to open back up. We hope that happens in the hours after the Supreme Court sides with borrowers. But we're also realistic about what this court could do, and the chances of success are not guaranteed. And so figuring out a way to get your debt canceled under existing programs is the best thing you can do while you wait.
Thanks so much, Mike. And I think that covered a lot of our cancellation questions. So what I'm going to try to do, we got a lot about IDR and PSLF, so we're going to try to jump to those. But before we do, one question that kind of leads us in there. Someone says they're eligible for part of, the cancellation relief that you just talked about, but they also have PSLF eligibility. Does applying for one program prevent them from being eligible for another or accessing relief from another? So can you apply for President Biden's debt relief plan and still be able to apply for PSLF?
I can take this one. So the great news is that these are discrete programs, and so you're able to apply for both. So you can apply for PSLF and try to get your debt canceled through PSLF, and then in the meantime, you can also hope to get the debt relief plan from President Biden, where you might get $10,000 or $20,000 canceled and knock that off the top of your balance, and then apply for PSLF and try to get the remainder canceled through PSLF. So the great news is that you can apply for both.
Thanks so much, Amy. And then we have a question for someone who didn't enroll into IDR until a couple of years after they entered in repayment. And they want to know, when does that clock start for either that 20 or 25 years to get to cancellation?
I'm happy to take this, Amy. So the income-driven payment plans were originally started in 1994. So any of the months in which after 1994, in which you have payments that kind of meet under the bucket of things that will be reclassified. So you were in any kind of repayment plan after 1994, or if you have the cumulative 36 months of forbearances, the deferments before the certain period of time. So all of that time after 1994 will be reclassified as IDR payments.
Thanks so much, Persis. And a quick follow-up, 2 questions about different types of periods, different types of deferments. Would hardship deferment count for this for your IDR account under the account adjustment?
So economic hardship deferments actually do count, at least for up to 3 years, count towards IDR already under the existing rules. So it should, but also just remember that all deferments prior to 2014 count towards the IDR account adjustment.
And one more, we had someone who was asking about also in-school deferment while they were in grad school, if you don't mind clarifying.
In-school deferments is a no, unfortunately.
Thanks, Persis.
Yeah.
We've also gotten some questions about people about questions during the payment pause. So someone was saying, I haven't been making payments during the payment pause. Will they still be able to get credit towards either the IDR account adjustment or PSLF for that period of time?
So I am assuming that they are payments that are paused, like department held loans, because they are paused. But yes, during the pause, all of those ones count as IDR and PSLF payments.
And what should someone do? They said, I'm not yet at that 20 or 20-year deadline for the IDR account adjustment. Or maybe, for example, someone might say on this call, they're not yet at that 10-year, 120 payment mark for PSLF. Can they still take advantage of these programs? Are there any things that they should be doing right now?
Yeah, it's a great time to be, reviewing whether or not you want to pursue PSLF or the IDR account adjustment and get on track. So there are a lot of benefits to applying right now, particularly if you have to consolidate your loans. Normally when you consolidate into a direct loan for PSLF, the clock restarted. So any credit that you had gained towards PSLF credit was back at 0 when you consolidated. But one of the benefits of consolidating right now is that you can keep that past credit either towards PSLF or towards IDR, cancellation. And so there are benefits to applying right now or to consolidating right now. And you don't have to be, you could have just started repayment right now and kind of be looking to enroll in these programs at the moment, so that you can get on track. It's about raising your hand and letting the Department of Education know that you will want to seek PSLF or you want to seek IDR cancellation through this IDR account adjustment. And so it doesn't matter if you're 15 years into repayment or like a month into repayment. These are options for you, and so it's a good idea to get on track now so that you're on track.
Awesome, thanks, Amy. And one really quick question to follow up with that, since you mentioned consolidation, we got a couple of people who said, they're thinking about consolidating based on the information you gave, but they've gotten warnings that said if they consolidate right now, they could lose any prior credit. Can you talk a little bit about why this time might be a little bit different?
Yeah, so this is what I mentioned at the top of the last question. So previously, when you consolidated either for the purposes of PSLF or for another reason, you lost any credit that you had gained on the other loan because when you consolidate, you're essentially taking out a new loan with the federal government. This isn't the case right now because this IDR account adjustment is happening. And I understand that these communiques can be very confusing, but these are likely auto-generated responses that the government just hasn't had time to fix during this kind of special period of time. So I can understand people's trepidation in wanting to consolidate, given that communique, but because of the IDR account adjustment, that isn't the case. You can keep that past credit towards the new loan.
Awesome. And then a question, we have a couple of people who asked questions about having gaps in terms of the time of their schooling. So they may have gone to college, worked for a bit, then went back to grad school and then worked for a bit. Can you talk about different options they might have? They're trying to figure out what should they do with those different gaps of employment? Are they still eligible for these programs?
So I think I'm happy to jump in here. Yeah, so like Amy said earlier, your time in these programs does not need to be consecutive. It's about the cumulative amount of time. So if you were if you took out a loan for undergrad, you paid for 5 years, and then you went back to school, on those loans, if those loans are kept separate, on those loans, it's just a gap in time. Now it gets a little bit more tricky if you do, take out new loans. And so those loans now kind of have different timelines that they're working on. If they're separate loans, they are loan by loan in terms of the timelines that they're on. One of the important things to understand with the IDR account adjustment is right now, if you consolidate them all together, they actually all go back to the oldest loan. That is not how it will work once the IDR account adjustment is over. But at this moment, if you consolidate up till the magic date that Amy kept saying, December 31st of this year, you will actually get credit for the up to the time of the oldest loan. So I think that's another reason why right now is a really good time to consolidate those loans, especially in that kind of scenario.
Thanks so much, Percy. It's super helpful. Also, a couple of questions we've gotten about PSLF we'll jump to really quickly. There's someone who says, they're currently retired. They have more than 120 eligible payments, but they have fewer than 120 qualifying payments. Is there anything that they could do, or are there certain steps they should try to take to qualify for PSLF?
This is a great question. So this is one of the main differences between the PSLF waiver that I mentioned and what's happening right now under the IDR account adjustment. So unfortunately, under the IDR account adjustment, if you're seeking PSLF, you need to be currently employed by a public service entity in order to get PSLF. And so if a retired person kind of missed the window under the waiver, there wouldn't be an option to get PSLF during this IDR account adjustment. So it might be an option to look at cancellation through the IDR account adjustment generally. If you've been in repayment a really long time, maybe you have 20 or 25 years in repayment that might be eligible for the IDR account adjustment. I'm not sure if Persis or Mike, you have anything else to add that might be helpful for these folks.
That was perfect.
The one thing I will add, just because I don't know that this is necessarily the question that was being asked here, but I think I've also seen some questions about there being a distinction between how many payments you have counted as qualifying versus how many payments MOHELA or the servicers have counted. And so if there is a discrepancy in that number, I would encourage folks to submit a complaint, because if you have submitted the PSLF paperwork, and you should have crossed the threshold and it was just because of a servicer error, I think contacting the ombudsman is the appropriate way with the federal student aid. Because we have definitely seen that happen.
Thank you so much, Persis, for that added part. And then someone says, is there a deadline to certify that someone's a nonprofit employee and they're trying to qualify for PSLF?
So there isn't a deadline. The deadline that's most important is for that consolidation piece. So if you need to consolidate, you need to do that before December 31st. However, as I mentioned, it's a good idea to make sure that you're submitting your PSLF forms annually to make sure that you're on track and catch any mistakes that happen or that might happen in that process so that you can deal with them in real time. And we also recommend that you do it anytime that you switch public service employers so that you can let the Department of Education know that you're still working in the public service during that time. So there isn't necessarily a deadline, but certainly if you have passed PSLF, or I'm sorry, if you have passed public service work since the year 2007, since October 1st of 2007, it's a good idea to submit it as soon as possible so that you can, fix any problems that might come up.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. And then we have a couple of questions too for people who may have worked part-time or taken leave from work. We had a couple of people ask if they took vacation, for example, or parental leave while they were working for a qualifying nonprofit. Will those periods of time count towards PSLF?
So I want to be very, very careful because it's gonna like lots of things the answer is mostly yes. And then there are edge cases where one wants to be careful in terms of how you structured things within your employment, right? But generally vacation time taken while you were employed and it is just paid, paid leave that you have, so that time still counts as qualifying time, as well as time that is covered under the Family Medical Leave Act. Counts as qualifying time. Now, again, I think, be a little bit careful here, but in general, yes, parental leave and vacation time will count as qualifying time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Persis. And then someone says they currently work part-time. They have more than 30 hours part-time working for a qualifying public service employer, but they also work part-time for a for-profit employer. Does that disqualify them?
It does not. So I think the important thing is that you have more than 30 hours in the public service time. And so that's the piece that you would need to get certified. And as I'm hearing the question, what I'm hearing is that the employer calls it part-time, but is more than 30 hours. And so I think what is important to understand is that for these purposes, the Department of Education counts any amount of time over 30 hours as full-time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Persis. And we have a couple more PSLF questions, and then we're going to jump to Fresh Start because we also got a couple of questions on default as well. But one question, again, for Parent Plus borrowers. One, can we just talk just one more time about eligibility for Parent Plus borrowers on PSLF? And then two, another follow-up question on that. Someone says, they have a Parent Plus loan and they work in public service. So they were just curious how that affects their eligibility.
So we have good news for you. Yeah, Parent Plus borrowers are eligible to receive PSLF credit through this IDR account adjustment that's happening right now. Parent Plus loans in general, which are loans that you take out for your children's education, they're direct loans, and so they are eligible for the PSLF program generally. the thing that, you know, is exciting about the IDR account adjustment is that they can get that retroactive credit to count towards PSLF on their Parent Plus loans. And so, you know, the action items would be to submit your PSLF forms and make sure that, you know, you're counting all of your employment time in the public service. And then another thing to consider might be getting on an income-driven repayment plan. The standard plan also would be an option for Parent Plus borrowers and might be more affordable. It's just going to be a matter of figuring out which is the more affordable option for you. You can go to studentaid.gov and look at the repayment calculator tool. And if you check that out and you know, look at like the different options for repayment, you can see which option might be most affordable for you. So that's something that you can consider as well. For Parent Plus borrowers, but yes, you are eligible for that retroactive credit.
Thanks so much, Amy. And we got one more question before we jump to the next question. Someone asked again about sharing information about the ombuds and in places where you can get help if you have to file a complaint or you need to follow up with federal student aid. We're going to send that out in a follow-up email in addition to the recording. So you will get a recording, a link to Cancel My Student Debt, which also has a lot of information on these information on these programs we discussed, and information about how to reach out to the ombuds if you have questions. One of the questions was, do you just mind really quickly again walking through the process? What should someone do if they're either if they know they're in default? So they may have been someone who said, you know, they were previously getting their wages garnished prior to the payment pause, or someone just wants to know what are the steps they need to take to get out of default through Fresh Start.
Yeah, basically you have two options and there's a timeline. So you have to do it within a year after the payment pause ends. So the payment pause is set to end on September 1st of this year. So you have until next September 1st, essentially, of 2024 to do one of two things. You can either request a repayment to get put on a repayment plan by contacting your guarantee agency or the default resolution group, or you could request you know, financial aid at an eligible institution. So those are the two options, and you have a year to do that in order to get out of default through the Fresh Start initiative.
Thanks so much, Amy. And then just two quick clarifying questions. Is default the same thing as having a loan in collections?
I would say probably yes, but you should go to studentaid.gov to verify the status of your loans.
Thank you so much, Persis. And then just one more follow-up to that. Do you mind explaining the difference between default and forbearance?
So default is the status where your loans have gone 270 days past due. And so that's what it technically means to default, is you have 270 days. Forbearance is a pause, right? So you have not missed any payments when you're in a forbearance, that you have an agreement with the servicer to pause the payments. And so nothing is due. Now, interest will still accrue and that sort of thing, but and so that is a negative consequence, but it is not seen as you being past due on a pay on a bill. You have not missed a payment.
Thank you so much, Persis. That's so helpful. And then just another, a couple of really quick questions if we can in this last minute. Someone was asking, this is just all really complicated and they're just trying to figure out what to do. Are there any places where people can go for help? I know we listed some resources, but if you all are able to voice over any other places where people can seek help, that would be great.
So of course, another plug for cancelmystudentdebt.org. We have a lot of resources there. The other thing in there is that there are links to other resources as well that folks should look out for. These issues do get very complicated. So, you know, some of the resources that folks should look out for, if they try themselves, we have the links for that. You know, if not, you know, submitting a complaint to the Ombudsman's office at Federal Student Aid is one option. And then if you really are struggling to get a problem solved, you might need to find a legal aid, a lawyer or legal aid office. And so there is a link to resources on where you can find those legal resources in your communities as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Persis. That was really helpful. And sorry, I'm going to squeeze in one last question if you all don't mind. We got a couple of people asking just different kinds of qualifying employers, and a lot of these are different schools. So someone said maybe they work for a community college, you know, part-time, but they still had 30 hours with that count, or someone said they worked for their university as a student, but if they're full-time with that count. So people are curious, they may have had different roles at a school, or they may have worked for a private college, or trying to figure out how do they make that distinction when that employer is a qualified employer.
So a couple of thoughts here. You could go to the PSLF help tool, which is on studentaid.gov, and they keep a list of qualifying employers. It's not exhaustive, however. If your employer is a 501c3 nonprofit, but they don't appear when you run the search, it might be because someone from that organization has never applied to PSLF in the past. So it might be helpful in helping you decide whether or not that employer is qualifying. But generally, again, just to repeat, like, any level of government, so federal, state, local, or tribal governments, or any 501c3 nonprofit is eligible for public service loan forgiveness. There's also this other category of other nonprofits that maybe don't qualify as that, and what falls into that a lot is emergency services that might not be, through the county or registered as a 501c3 nonprofit, but they're doing work for the public service. If you are, maybe your employer says that you're part-time, but you work over 30 hours a week, that generally, that 30-hour mark is generally what would get you across the finish line for PSLF purposes. But it's also very employer dependent. And so it's a matter of what your employer would be willing to verify that, you worked. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if anyone else has any other insight on this, but just wanted to.
I think the only other piece is, many schools are 501c3s or government, and I would just verify with the employer what their tax status is. I think that is probably the simplest for that specific scenario.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And I know we're a little bit over, but I'm going to hand it back over to Mike to close this out. But thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Echoing what Kat said, thank you for joining us, and thank you for asking such amazing detailed questions. Thank you again to Amy for being a superstar and answering almost all of them, including all of the hard ones, and Persis, as always, for helping us level set and for getting into the weeds. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we got a long road ahead of us. This webinar is going to be recorded. We will make sure that it gets distributed to participants. There is lots of great information on cancelmystudentdebt.org. This will not be the last of these that we do. And I think we are all watching the Supreme Court to see what happens later this month. And rest assured that we will be back here as a group to help you guys make sense of whatever comes down from the High Court. So please stay with us. Don't lose faith. Keep pushing for debt relief, and we will do the same. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.